The chair had 4 legs of dark wood and a high back carved with wings that curled toward each other at the top. It had not moved from its place at the head of the long table in 9 days. No one touched it. No one was allowed to touch it, not until the rites were finished and the spirit inside was let go. Rin knew this because her aunt had told her, in a voice that shook only a little. The chair belonged to her father, Commander Torin, and until the mourning days ended, it would stay exactly where he had left it, pushed back just enough for a tall man to rise from it in a hurry, the way he always did when duty called him away. Rin was 6 years old, small even for a Draconi child, with pale green scales along her arms and a soft frill at the back of her neck that had not yet grown stiff with age. She did not fully understand what it meant that her father was not coming back. She understood that people spoke in quiet voices now. She understood that the halls of Clan Home Voss smelled of burning incense instead of cooking food. She understood that every evening, when the sun went down over the stone towers, she was expected to be somewhere else, somewhere out of the way, while the adults dealt with things too large for her to be part of. So every evening, she went to the Great Hall instead. She would slip past the guards, who had learned not to stop her, and climb into the chair beside her father's, the one that had always been hers at family meals. From there she could see his chair perfectly. She would talk to it sometimes. Not loudly, not so anyone passing outside could hear, but enough to fill the silence. She told the chair about her day. She told it that her aunt kept forgetting to braid her frill properly. She told it that she was still angry that no one had let her see him before the funeral ships came home. Tonight, like every night, the household was busy elsewhere. Servants moved through distant corridors carrying banners and ceremonial cloth for the coming rites. Elders argued behind closed doors about matters of succession and alliance, their voices low but sharp. Somewhere far off, a human transport ship had landed on the outer platform, carrying officers who had come to pay their respects to a commander who had died protecting a convoy that was not even his own to protect. Ren had heard whispers about this. Humans, in her father's hall. It seemed strange to her, though she could not say exactly why. She sat now with her knees pulled up to her chest, watching dust drift through a shaft of dying orange light from the high windows. The hall was enormous, built for feasts and councils, and in the emptiness her own presence felt very small. She liked it that way tonight. Smallness meant no one would notice her crying, if it came to that. It had not come to that yet. She had cried plenty in the first days, when the news first arrived, when her aunt had knelt in front of her and said the words so carefully, as if speaking too quickly might make them worse. But by now the crying had settled into something quieter, something that sat behind her ribs and did not always show on her face. She was not sure if that was better or worse. "You would tell me to eat something," she said to the chair, her voice small in the wide room. "You always said I skip dinner when I am upset. I am not skipping it. I am just not hungry." The chair, of course, said nothing back. The hall grew darker. Shadows pooled beneath the long table and crept up the carved legs of the empty chair. Rin pulled her knees tighter and rested her chin on them, watching the last strip of color fade from the western windows. She did not hear the door at the far end of the hall open. She did not hear the quiet, even footsteps that followed, footsteps that did not belong to any servant or guard she knew, footsteps that paused, uncertain, just inside the doorway, as if their owner was deciding whether he had any right to be there at all. She only noticed when a shape settled onto the bench across the table from her, not too close, not too far, and said nothing at all. Ren startled, her tail flicking against the stone floor, and looked up to find a human sitting quietly in the near dark, watching neither her nor the chair, but the space between them, as though giving her exactly as much room as she needed and not one measure less. She did not know yet that this stranger would return the next night, and the night after that. She did not know that the silence he brought with him would, in time, feel less like an intrusion and more like company. All she knew, in this first quiet moment, was that for the first time in 9 days, someone had remembered she was there, and had chosen to say nothing about it at all. Daniel had spent the whole day underneath a coolant line that was 300 years older than any machine he had ever worked on back home. The Draconi built their support systems to last centuries, not decades, and half the parts he needed to check did not have any human name for them yet. He liked that kind of work. It kept his hands busy and his mind quiet, which was more than he could say for most of the humans on this posting. who spent their free hours arguing about politics they could not change. He was part of the coalition's technical support wing, sent to Caldris along with a dozen others to help maintain the systems inside Clanhome Voss during the mourning period. It was not glamorous work. Nobody back on the fleet ships would call it heroic. But someone had to keep the lights working and the air clean while an entire household grieved, and Daniel did not mind being that someone. He had heard about Commander Torrin the way most of the coalition had, through official reports and quiet conversations in the mess hall. A Draconi commander who held a dying line so human transports could escape. Daniel had not known him personally, but two of the maintenance crew he worked with had been on one of those very transports, and they spoke of the man with a kind of respect Daniel rarely heard humans give to anyone, let alone someone from another species. That was part of why, when he passed the Great Hall the night before and saw a small shape sitting alone in the dark beside an empty chair, he had not simply walked on. He had almost talked himself out of going back. It was not his place, he told himself. She was a child, and a grieving one, and a Draconi noble besides, not someone a human maintenance worker should be sitting next to uninvited. But something about the stillness of her, the way she had not even looked up when he sat down, stayed with him through the whole next day, distracting him more than the coolant line ever could. So that evening, when his shift ended, he found himself walking toward the Great Hall again, telling himself he would just check that she was all right and then leave. She was there, exactly where she had been the night before, in the smaller chair beside the empty one. She looked up when he entered this time, her eyes narrow and careful in the dim blue light. "You came back," she said. It was not quite a question. "I did," Daniel said. He stayed near the door, not wanting to push further than he was welcome. "I can leave if you want." Ren studied him for a long moment. Humans were still strange to her, taller than Draconi children, but shorter than most adults, with skin that showed every feeling on their faces in a way Draconi skin never did. She had seen humans before, at official gatherings, always stiff and formal, always careful with their words. This one did not seem to be trying very hard to be anything at all. "You can stay," she said finally, "if you do not talk too much." Eventually, Ren spoke again, so quietly he almost missed it. "Did you know him?" "My father." Daniel considered lying to make her feel better, then decided against it. She deserved better than a comfortable lie from a stranger. "No," he said. "I never met him. But I've worked with people who were alive because of him. They talk about him like he mattered. A lot." Ren's tail curled slightly against the floor, the closest thing to a reaction she gave. "Everyone says that. That he mattered. No one tells me what it means." "I don't think I'm the right person to explain that," Daniel admitted. "I only know pieces. But if you want, I could find out more. Ask around. Bring back whatever I learn, and you can decide what it means yourself." It was a small offer, and he half expected her to refuse it, or to ask why a human maintenance worker would bother. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment, studying him with the same careful eyes as before, as though weighing whether this was another empty promise from another distracted adult. "All right," she said finally, "but you have to actually come back. Not just say you will." "I will," Daniel said, and meant it. He did not know yet how many evenings that promise would turn into, or how far it would eventually carry him. He only knew, as he rose to leave her to the quiet of the hall, that he intended to keep it. The recording was 11 seconds long, and Ren had asked to hear it 4 times already. Captain Halden did not mind playing it a 5th time. He sat across from her in a small side room off the Great Hall, a data pad resting on the table between them, and pressed the switch again. Her father's voice filled the room, steady and calm despite the static, despite whatever chaos had surrounded him when he recorded it. "This is Commander Torrin, final transmission. Hold formation until the human convoy clears the debris field. Tell them I considered their people under my protection until the end. Voss out." 11 seconds. Ren had counted them herself, on her claws, the first time she heard it. "Play it again," she said. "Ren," Halden said gently, "maybe we should talk about it instead, this time." She frowned at him, but did not argue. Halden was a careful man, older than Daniel by a good number of years, with the kind of patience that came from decades of working between two very different peoples who did not always understand each other. He had known Torrin personally, had stood beside him in strategy rooms more than once, and Ren had come to trust him in the way children often trust adults who never rush them toward an answer. "Tell me what happened," Ren said. All of it. Not the short version they give the council. Halden glanced toward the doorway, where Daniel stood quietly, having walked her here after their evening in the great hall at her own insistence. He gave a small nod, as if to say the human maintenance worker could stay, before turning back to Ren. Your father's fleet was escorting a supply route near the outer colonies, Halden began. It was supposed to be routine. Then hostile ships came out of the debris field faster than anyone expected, cutting straight toward a human evacuation convoy that had no defenses of its own. Civilians, families, people who had no way to fight back. Ren listened without moving, her eyes fixed on the data pad, as if it might show her a picture of the battle if she looked hard enough. Your father could have pulled his fleet back, Halden continued. Some of his officers wanted him to. It would have been the safer choice, tactically. Instead, he turned his ships between the hostiles and the convoy, and held the line long enough for every single transport to escape into the jump corridor. And then he died, Ren said flatly. I know some of them, he said, before he had quite decided to speak at all. Ren looked up sharply. Know who? People from that convoy, Daniel said. Not well, but 2 of the techs I work with were on those transports. They don't talk about it much, but when they do, they always mention his name. What do they say? Ren asked. Daniel thought carefully before answering, wanting to get it right. They say they didn't understand, at first, why a Draconi commander would put his whole fleet at risk for humans he'd never met. But now, when people back home ask why the alliance matters, that's the story they tell. Not a treaty, not a speech. Him, turning his ships around. Ren was quiet for a long time. Halden did not press her, and Daniel did not either, both of them letting the silence stretch as long as she needed it to. He always said the chair was for family, she said eventually, so softly Halden had to lean in slightly to hear it. He said it didn't matter what someone looked like, as long as they were the kind of people worth protecting. I thought he only meant Draconi when he said that. Doesn't sound like he did, Daniel said quietly. Ren looked at him for a long moment, then back at the data pad still resting between her and Halden. Play it again, she said. The last time. I want to hear it once more, and then I don't want to hear it again for a while. Halden pressed the switch. 11 seconds. Steady and calm despite the static. When it finished, Ren sat back in her chair, and for the first time since Daniel had met her, she looked less like a child guarding an empty seat, and more like someone beginning, slowly, to understand what exactly it was she was guarding it for. Counselor Rask did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Decades of sitting on the ruling council of Clanhome Voss had taught him that a quiet, measured tone carried further than shouting ever could, especially when the words themselves were sharp enough to cut on their own. A human, he said, sitting beside the commander's daughter, night after night, in the morning hall itself. Does no one else find this troubling? The council chamber was smaller than the great hall, round in shape, and lined with old stone benches worn smooth by generations of Draconi elders. 6 of them sat now in the dim evening light, along with Captain Halden, who had been summoned to answer for a situation he had not created but found himself defending regardless. The child asked for his company, Halden said evenly. No one assigned him to her. He noticed she was alone and chose to sit with her. That is the whole of it. That is not the whole of it, Rask said. It is a human, inside Clanhome Voss, during the most sacred mourning period our family has observed in a generation, forming an attachment to a child who has just lost her father. Whatever his intentions, the appearance alone damages this house. Some will say we have let outsiders into grief that was never theirs to share. With respect, Counselor, Halden said, the outsiders you speak of buried their own dead because of what Commander Torrin did for them. I would think that earns a small measure of trust. Rask's frill flared slightly, the only sign of irritation he allowed himself. Trust is not the issue. Tradition is. And traditions exist because they protect us from mistakes we cannot always see coming. It was at this point that the chamber door opened, and Ren walked in, small and unannounced, ignoring the startled looks of the 2 guards who had clearly failed to stop her in time. She had heard enough from the corridor outside to know exactly what was being discussed. You're talking about Daniel, she said, before anyone could tell her to leave. Ren, Halden said gently, this isn't. I know what it is, Ren said. Her voice shook slightly, but she did not stop. You're saying he shouldn't be allowed to sit with me. Because he's human. Children do not always see the larger consequences of, Rask began. My father died protecting humans he had never met, Ren said, cutting him off in a way that made even Halden's eyes widen slightly. Everyone keeps telling me that story like I'm supposed to be proud of it. And I am. But then you sit here and say a human sitting with me, quietly, at night, is somehow a problem. Which is it? Are they worth protecting, or aren't they? The chamber fell silent. Rask's mouth tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, clearly unused to being challenged so directly, least of all by a child. It is not the same thing, he said finally, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. It doesn't feel very different to me, Ren said. Halden, careful not to smile in front of the council, kept his expression neutral. For what it's worth, counselor, the young human in question has requested nothing from this house. No recognition, no reward, not even acknowledgement beyond what Ren herself has offered him. I've checked his record myself. He is, by every account, exactly as unremarkable as he appears. I do not think that is a mark against him. Rask studied Ren for a long moment. Then the other elders around him, several of whom, Ren noticed, were watching the exchange with expressions closer to quiet approval than concern. He may continue, Rask said at last, the words clearly costing him something to say. But this council will be watching. Should anything about this arrangement prove improper, it ends immediately. It won't, Ren said. She left the chamber without waiting to be dismissed, and Halden followed a moment later, leaving Rask alone with the other elders and a silence that suggested the matter, whatever he wished, was already decided in ways his authority could no longer easily undo. The first sign of trouble was not an alarm. It was the lights. All through Clenholm Voss, at the exact same moment, every lamp dimmed by half, then flickered back, then dimmed again, in a pattern too steady to be an accident. Daniel noticed it from the maintenance corridor beneath the Great Hall, where he had been running a final check on the coolant lines before the next evening's ceremony. He had spent enough time inside these systems over the past 2 weeks to know that lights did not behave like that on their own. He was halfway to the nearest control panel when the alarm finally did sound, a low, rising tone that echoed through every corridor of the estate at once. Word came fast after that, shouted down the halls by guards running toward the outer walls. Ships had dropped out of the sky without warning, small and fast, marked with colors Daniel did not recognize, but that made every Draconi guard around him go pale beneath their scales. Remnants of the same hostile faction that had killed Commander Torin, striking now, during the one night when the entire household leadership would be gathered together for the morning ceremony. Daniel's first thought was Ren. He found her exactly where he expected, in the Great Hall, where the ceremony preparations had left the room half decorated with banners and unlit ceremonial lamps. She was standing near the empty chair, frozen, while 2 guards argued over which direction was safest to move the household through. This way's blocked, one guard was saying. The east corridor's already sealed by security doors, and the main hall is the only clear path left, but that puts us right in the open courtyard. Daniel did not have a weapon. He did not have military training. What he had was 2 weeks spent underneath every major system in this building, learning its bones the way most soldiers learned a battlefield. There's another way, he said, stepping forward. Service corridor behind the kitchen stores. It runs under the east wing and comes out near the transport platform. It's not on any of your maps because it's old, older than the current security doors. The guards hesitated, unwilling to trust a human maintenance worker over their own training. But Ren, still standing frozen by the chair, spoke up in a voice that cut through their doubt. Do what he says. Keep moving, he said, keeping his voice level even as his own heart pounded hard enough to hurt. We're close. They emerged near the transport platform just as a second wave of hostile ships swept low overhead, forcing everyone flat against the wall. Daniel spotted a control panel beside the platform doors, one he recognized from his very first week of maintenance work, and moved to it without hesitation. What are you doing? One of the guards demanded. Buying time, Daniel said, already prying the panel open. Inside were the manual overrides for the platform's shield generator, a system so old most of the current guards had never even been trained on it, kept only because Draconi tradition insisted nothing be removed until it was proven useless. It was not useless tonight. Daniel rerouted power exactly the way he had studied doing during a quiet afternoon 2 weeks earlier, more out of curiosity than necessity. A shimmering barrier rose around the platform just as the hostile ships swept back for another pass, their weapons' fire scattering harmlessly off the old shield instead of tearing through unprotected stone and flesh. It held only long enough. Coalition defense ships arrived moments later, driving the attackers back into the dark from which they had come, but that handful of seconds had been enough to keep everyone on the platform alive. In the sudden quiet that followed, Ren sat down hard against the wall, her legs no longer steady beneath her, and Daniel knelt beside her, checking without a word that she was unhurt. "You knew all of that," she said finally, still catching her breath. "The corridor, the shield, all of it. I read a lot," Daniel said simply. "Old systems mostly. Didn't think it would matter much beyond keeping the lights on." Ren looked at him for a long moment, then, unexpectedly, let out a short, shaky laugh, the first sound close to joy Daniel had heard from her since they met. "My father would have liked you," she said. "He always said the quiet ones were worth watching closest." The chair moved for the first time in 11 days. It happened slowly, carefully, lifted by two of the household's oldest servants and carried to its place at the center of the great hall, where the morning rite would finally be completed. The banners damaged in the attack 3 nights earlier had been replaced. The scorch marks along the outer courtyard had been cleared away, though the memory of that night had not faded quite so easily from anyone who had lived through it. Ren stood near the front of the gathered household, dressed in the pale ceremonial wrap reserved for a commander's closest family, her frill braided properly for once, though she had insisted on doing it herself rather than letting her aunt fuss over it. She did not feel like the same small child who had hidden in the corner of this hall 11 nights ago, talking quietly to an empty chair because no one else had time to listen. The elders were gathered along both sides of the hall, Counselor Rask among them, standing straighter than usual, his expression unreadable but no longer carrying the sharp suspicion Ren remembered from the council chamber. Captain Halden stood near the back with the small human delegation, present as official witnesses to the alliance the coalition had helped defend 3 nights before. Daniel stood among them too, in a simple uniform rather than his usual maintenance gear, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the formality of the occasion but present all the same, because Ren had asked him to be, and he had not once broken a promise to her yet. The eldest priest of the household stepped forward as the chairs settled into place, and the hall fell silent. This was the moment, Ren had been told, when the spirit of the departed was formally released from its place among the living, allowed to move on rather than lingering, as tradition said it otherwise might, tied to the empty seat that had once been theirs alone. "Who speaks for the fallen?" the priest asked, as custom required. Normally, it would have been the eldest surviving relative, an uncle or grandmother, someone with the authority of age behind their words. But Ren had asked, days earlier, in a quiet conversation with her aunt that had left the older woman in tears, whether she might be allowed to speak instead. Her aunt had not argued. No one, in the end, had argued. She paused, glancing once toward the back of the hall, where Daniel stood watching quietly, exactly as he always did. "He is gone from this chair now," Ren continued, "but not from this house, and not from the people whose lives he chose to protect with his own. I release him from this seat, as tradition asks, but I do not release his memory, and I do not release what he taught me, which I intend to carry for as long as I live." The priest completed the rite with words Ren barely heard, her attention fixed instead on the chair itself, empty still, but no longer heavy with the same aching stillness it had carried for 11 long days. It felt, for the first time, like an ending rather than an open wound. When the ceremony finished, and the formal gathering began to loosen into quieter conversation, Counselor Rask approached her directly, something he had not done since the night of the council chamber confrontation. "Your father would be proud," he said simply, and though his tone remained as measured as ever, there was something almost warm behind the words. "As, I suspect, would many others in this hall tonight, myself included, though I confess it took me longer than it should have to see it clearly." Ren accepted the words with a small nod, more grace than she might have managed a few weeks earlier, and watched him move on to speak with Halden before finally making her way toward the back of the hall, where Daniel waited. You didn't have to come, she told him, though she was glad he had. I told you I'd keep coming back, Daniel said. Didn't figure a ceremony should be any different. Rin looked past him, toward the chair one last time. Now simply a chair again rather than a shrine to an unfinished grief. I used to sit there every night and talk to it because I thought no one else was listening, she said. I don't need to do that anymore. But I still like having someone to talk to. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel said. Not unless the coalition reassigns me somewhere with worse coolant lines, anyway. Rin allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the kind that had been rare on her face these past weeks, and together they walked out of the great hall into the cool night air, leaving the chair behind them, finally at rest, and no longer empty in the way that mattered most.